Hello and welcome to the MISEM podcast. This is the podcast where we talk to MISEM members and associates about their current or recent research into the medieval world of Central Europe. I'm Karen Culver, and today it is my great pleasure to be back in Vienna and meeting with Adinel Dinkę to talk about his work on Restory, recovering cultural roots of small communities. Adinel is an associate professor in Cluj-Napoca University and a senior research fellow at the Romanian Academy. He earned his PhD in medieval history in 2008 and pursued postdoctoral projects in Austria and Germany. Since 2018, he is the director of his university's research unit, Transcript, the Centre for Diplomatic and Medieval Documentary Paleography. His fields of interest include Latin paleography, diplomatic codicology, history of the Latin Church and its institutions, medieval jurisprudence, and school education. His most recent book is the monograph The Transylvanian Saxons and Their Books in the Middle Ages. He is currently the lead researcher on the Restory research project, which is a multi-year, multi-million euro, multi-partner and multiple activity research project focused mainly in Transylvania on modern-day Romania. Because of all this work, Adinel has to travel very, very widely and moves all over Europe all of the time. But he does tell me he loves being at home with his cats. Adinel, welcome to the MISEM podcast.
Thank you very much, Karen. It's absolutely lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. Now, to start us off, please, could you give us a quick overview of the Restory program, because it sounds massive?
It is indeed a massive project. It's a research project coordinated by my home university, Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj-Napoca, Romania. In fact, this project brings together a consortium of 20 institutions, 20 partners from 12 countries. If you would imagine some sort of a map of Europe, you would travel from Iceland, from Helsinki, from Tartu to Coimbra in Portugal, to Sardinia, to Greece, traveling over Central Europe. So these are the partners of this research initiative that plans to explore the textual and oral heritage of small and middle-sized communities, those communities who were traditionally ignored by the research avenues that were practiced throughout Europe and the globe for the past decades. I would also add that the project is focusing mainly on the Transylvanian Saxons and their historical experience in order to uncover, to rediscover sustainable past practices and revive cultural traditions. The project also combines historical texts with oral history interviews. It brings together not only a lot of partners, but also interesting, quite opposite methodologies. The Middle Ages, which was a time of oral communication, but now it's based on textual scholarship, and the contemporary history, which is the age of the written word, but the methodology implied in this project is the interviewing of people through the lenses of oral histories. The aim, the main goal of the project is to connect this heritage of small and middle-sized communities with the contemporary community development and to cultural institutions that are part of the local identity building.
That's amazing. And I hadn't thought about it before. You're using old text when it was a spoken community, and you're using the spoken word in a text-based community.
Exactly. That's
very interesting.
That was part of the innovative contribution of this project to bring together two apparently very distinctive way of looking at history, of past experiences. So the medieval times and the experiences, what was happening over the last 2 or 3 generations, what can be reached through interviewing people still living, still breathing. That's the contradictory and also the intriguing part of the research program.
You mentioned it's focused mainly in Transylvania and on the Transylvanian Saxons. What makes them and their region a really good case study for this research project?
In my view, research, and it's not just my opinion, a research endeavour means, first of all, fresh information, bringing something that was not seen or known before. So adding new dimensions to a certain body of concepts, of ideas, of questions. The Transylvanian Saxons are part of an unknown story of the European late medieval development, or at least they are known mainly under local circumstances. Their past experience have not been incorporated yet into a wider understanding of European development. So that alone would make the story of the Transylvanian Saxons very, very interesting. It's part of something we haven't figured out yet. On the other hand, because there is a deeper meaning of the historical experience of the Transylvanian Saxons, is the space itself. So you mentioned that in your question, what makes the region interesting? So the population that live there, but also the space. The space, the Transylvania itself, and especially those regions inhabited by these high medieval and late medieval colonists, is interesting in itself. It's a frontier line between Catholic Latin world and the Eastern Orthodox areas. It's a space of overlapping traditions, of cultural dialogues. So it is a fringe area of Europe past that opens opportunities, possibilities, that allows the researcher to see parallel developments in comparison to what has been studied before. Both the historical destiny of a certain type of population, but also the region, the space, the containers of the historical episodes is very much interesting.
Yeah, I can get that. I have read the original proposal for the research project, so I know it's divided into 4 linked axes. The first 2 are discovery and learn. Now, discovery is what most traditional archive research is within the selected communities. So this I can understand. The second is learn, which will turn your discovered stories into the history of the location for that local community. Can you explain how you would do that?
That was one of the major challenges when the group who wrote the project, that was one of the main issues we were facing, how we select stories. The selection process was very much linked to the idea of the overarching methodological architecture of the projects. The way the project was drafted took a lot of inspiration from the social sciences. I would also mention the most influential ones. For example, local history, which is very much at home in England or in Germany. Microhistory. Microhistory was one of the foundational pillar of this project. So we've been inspired so much by the Italian microhistory of the 1970s. We are trying to identify relevant episodes, very, very contextualized, very close to what the real life or real experiences might have been. We took inspiration from various perspectives that one could encounter within the large field of critical heritage studies. The idea of heritage from below, the co-creation of cultural heritage were also part of the discourse that framed the project. So we are trying to identify those historical instances that align to these, let's call them theoretical frameworks. And we are trying to identify those episodes that reflect the life, or allow me to reframe it a little bit negatively. We are not trying to get to the celebrities of the past. We are not dealing with kings, with popes, with dukes, with this elite of the past. We are dealing with what was called the common person, the common individual. We are getting as close as possible to the representative figures of these small and middle-sized communities.
That makes a lot of sense. And I suppose then with these episodes of the ordinary people in small communities, by discovering that story, you are learning about that small community.
Quite a lot. And the intention of the project is to engage the today's members of the small and middle-sized community to be part of this learning curve, of this learning process, and we are hoping to learn together something about the actual past of that allegedly irrelevant stories that happened in that environment.
Yeah, I think I'd like to be involved in that project. The episodes that you've mentioned as particularly relevant in the proposal were going to be focusing on recycling and reuse of materials and elementary education. Now, to me, recycling, reuse and education seem completely unrelated. Why were these themes selected and what is their connection?
There is, in fact, a common element behind these two ideas that you were just mentioning: elementary schooling, education, and reuse, recycle of materials. The common idea behind both of them is I would use a very modern concept, is the management of resources. We are speaking both of the management of material resources, be that wood, stone, metal, and so on, but we are also having in mind the management of the human resources, the most lucrative, if you want to, management, which means schooling. Having a well-trained, well-educated population is the best investment you can have, regardless of the time. So that's the idea behind the link between reuse of materials and education in a set historical time.
The minute you said resources, I'm thinking, yeah, I get that now. It's mental resources and physical resources and making best use of them.
Perhaps it would be better to mention that these population we are speaking about, the Transylvanian Saxons, these colonists from the Middle Ages, were in fact a very reduced demographic body. We are speaking towards 1500 of approximately 70 to 90,000 individuals. So that would mean, I don't know, a middle-sized community from today. So that figure alone covering so much territory would imply a very conscious and careful management of human resources. You wouldn't allow yourself to waste human power. You really needed to understand how to deal with that rather reduced number of persons, to face a lot of adversities over time.
Yeah, that is very, very true. Your own research focuses on recycling and reuse of materials in the High Middle Ages. Please, can you give some examples of this recycling? And I understand there were also regulations, guild regulations, to do with some recycling. Can you explain further, please?
The phenomenon of reuse, of repurpose, of recycling, of repairing, if you want to, so some sort of a very effective management of resources, it's a problem, it's an issue hidden in plain sight during the Middle Ages. So you can find examples of this nature basically everywhere. One example close to my scholarly interest that immediately crosses my mind is the reuse of parchment sheets detached from discarded medieval manuscripts, reused, repurposed, reinvented, if you want, a second life as covers and wrappers of binding materials for later books, ledgers, registers of any sort. This is a very important research path that grew and grew over time, being right now one of the most important and valued research avenue globally, the so-called fragmentology. So that would be one important example I would mention. The regulation of guilds, of professional association are, again, a wonderful example of dealing effectively in a very cautious and strategical manner with resources. For example, metal scraps generated by a certain activity became prime materials for other branches of craftsmen or types of activities. Leather was also used and reused, wood as well. So guild regulations and various procedures described by professional associations are wonderful examples, are wonderful places to look for such contexts.
I suppose where we have so much stuff, we are so materially well off. Recycling to us now is only just getting going. It's just becoming the thing you have to do.
That's one of the accents the project Restory is trying to highlight today, that recycling and long use of material goods was for so many generations part of the intuitive, of the natural behavior. It became only recently part of the prescriptive behavior that is imposed by the authorities. So part of the rediscovering the roots is just re-including the idea of recycling as part of the cultural heritage, of the traditions that we are perhaps losing right now. That's one of the very important elements the Restory is trying to make us all aware of.
Yeah, and I think that's actually very, very important. We always should be reusing. We waste so much today. Moving on, you suggest in your paper, the paper entitled Intuitive Sustainability, Some Theoretical Remarks on Medieval Management of Resources, that medieval people recycled items obviously for the practical and economic reasons, but also there were much deeper reasons than that. Can you explain that further?
Of course, the main driver of recycling behavior and practices is pragmatic. People needed that very material, that item or piece of stone, wood, metal, whatever. But there are certain contexts in which the motivation behind the acts of recycling, of reusing, of repurposing are a little bit different. And I would say when recycling becomes repurpose and when the pragmatism is replaced by symbolic value, we're not speaking anymore of recycling, we are speaking, or we could speak of upcycling. A little bit of added value to that act of recycling. I remember I studied some years ago, and I've published with the help of colleagues a couple of articles of late 15th, early 16th century parish priests in Transylvania, coming precisely of these circles of the Transylvanian Saxons who used as personal seals in their rings antique gems of the late antiquity. It was not a simple act of repurposing a very old object. It was a way of expressing their cultural identity. They declare themselves, by using those gems, they've declared themselves humanists, people that were part of a cultural elite of their time. So they've projected themselves as part of something special. So that's where recycling becomes upcycling, where a little bit of more value is added to the actual material reuse.
Yeah, I get that. When I get round to buying my 1950s second-hand Chanel dress, I will be upcycling rather than just cheapskating. Coming back to the Restory project, we've mentioned there are 4 axes, and we've talked about the first 2, which are quite normal for most Meeson researchers. The second 2 seem quite unusual in terms of what Meeson normally talks about and does. And this is the active transfer of the knowledge gained to the people who perhaps could be described as the keepers of culture, the local keepers of culture and memory, and finally to encourage the local staff of the galleries, libraries, archives, museums, the GLAM staff, to enhance their value of the heritage they are managing. I found that quite complicated to understand. Please, could you explain it further?
Of course. That would be the moment when I should mention that out of those 20 institutions that are making the consortium navigating this project, not all of them are academic institutions. There are also NGOs, private initiatives, municipal administration. So there are quite a lot of capabilities and competencies involved in this project. We are also working with community facilitators, so NGOs who are absolutely wonderful and very capable of bridging the academic world to the necessities and the problems of the local communities. So we are working with these very well-trained mediators, mostly being sociologists and journalists and so on. So that's one part of the answer. The second part of the answer is the problem we've seen, or the issue local stakeholders and the local GLAMs are facing. those active in small and middle-sized communities are currently facing a lot of problems, a lot of difficulties caused mainly, as it is well known, caused mainly by the insufficient financial support. They are not able to compete with universities, with research institutes to get funding for their own activities. So basically, they are facing day-to-day survival that leaves little to no room for research and creative activities and a real exploitation of the local heritage sites. That's where Restory tries to do something and tries to teach the GLAMs how to organize exhibitions, conferences, closer collaborations and institutional partnerships with academic institutions, trying in a way that would prove itself beneficial on both ways to identify appropriate financial instruments that would help these local GLAMs to navigate a little bit easier the environment they are living in.
It strikes me that the GLAMs in a small town would have severe competition for an audience, particularly from internet or television, which possibly seems more exciting. But I guess if the GLAMs have a good local story to tell, one that feels directly relevant to their audience, to their community, maybe the GLAMs will then start attracting back their local audience.
Of course, I've experienced myself this sort of dialogue. If you have a powerful, a very engaging local story, it's not about an international one or a national narrative. You really need something that happened there, in that very place. If you have that sort of thing, you would see positive reaction, you would see enthusiasm, you would see local engagement, you would see emotion. And you want people to invest emotionally in that story. And that's part of the challenge, I would say, raising awareness, trying to attract positive attention from your fellow citizens. It's part of the challenge. It's part of the pathway to success. So let's try. There are stories everywhere. You just need to try to identify them and then to dress them properly, to present them according to the needs of these days.
Yes, to attract that attention and make the world less homogenized, more individual.
Of course, and that's why I was mentioning a little bit earlier when you were rightfully asking about the selection process of the relevant stories. I tried to indicate the personal experiences of the so-called common man. I think that story would have a potential of explaining things a little bit better than an unrelated, distant event, be that large or very significant, than what really happened on the local territories.
Yeah, that's so true, so true. I am wondering now, as we're talking about the audience and the reaction, what sort of reaction are you getting, or do you anticipate you will get from the local communities in the areas you're working? Particularly as I understand the Saxon population that you are mainly focusing on actually left Transylvania a couple of generations back. So what are their stories relevant to the new people?
There are two parts of my answers. My very dear colleagues dealing with the interviews with the oral history, they are much more closer to the actual communities, and they can measure their reaction, and their recounts are fascinating. The reaction basically are mixed. You can find lack of interest, but you could also find quite a lot of enthusiasm and positive reactions. As far as my own experience goes, I've encountered a very inspiring and very positive reaction in one of the places that serves as a case study for the project, the small village called Zendorf, Jelna. Zendorf is the older German name. Jelna is the Romanian name today. And there is a highly interesting reaction there, a beautiful connection to the past that was built intuitively without the help of historians. The entire economy of the village was built around wine production. It was founded on wine barrels. And very recent entrepreneurial initiatives rediscovered, again intuitively, that tradition of winemaking. So there is a very successful enterprise dealing with wine, and two of the most successful wines they are producing right now are very much rooted in history. One of them is named after the very first mention of the village in the 13th century, and the other one has been labeled after one of the major discoveries of a mural of a biblical scene reproduced in the medieval parish church of the settlements. Even without the help of the historians, of the professional retailers of the past, that private initiative, local initiative, reconnected with the historical roots of the place. Imagine what would happen if they would have been helped by professional historians, as we are trying to do right now. We are trying to help them reconnect even deeper, even better with their own traditions.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Traditions are so important to us. Unfortunately, this has got to be my last question, because I know we're running out of time. On stories, on episodes, please, have you got any good stories yet? Can you share them with us?
Oh gosh, I would immediately say that the entire story of the Transylvanian Saxons would make a very successful TV series, from struggling pioneers around the middle of the 12th century, navigating various invasions, Mongol, Ottomans, cultural transformations, religious metamorphoses, and so on, facing communism, being part of a very unfair deal in the 1960s, 70s, and so on. So turning back to Western Europe eventually after so many centuries, when their identities were forged in Transylvania. So that story itself would make a very compelling and a very inspiring story. But of course there are quite a lot of individual episodes that happened on the local ground. I remember I've spoken in one of the consortium conferences, I've spoken about a very interesting episode from the early 15th century. Everything happens in one of the most important commercial hubs of the Transylvanian Saxons, Kronstadt, Brașov, and it is about a group of women who, motivated by their piety, by their religious feelings, decided to become part of the Cistercian order. So they became the Cistercian nuns under the authority of abbot and monks, and they are forced into immediately into manual labor. They were asked to cook for the monks, to clean their rooms, to do the gardening, and they refused. And they were punished and excommunicated and expelled from the order. And they suffered, as the papal document that tells us the story goes, and they've decided to react within the boundary of the institutional framework. So they've asked for help from a local judge, and they've ultimately asked the Pope to settle the dispute, and they were restored in their rights, and they were readmitted into the order, and everything went well ultimately. So it's a very inspiring story, I would say.
Yes, I would say so too. Did they get their own nunnery, or did they actually return to the abbot's rule?
One text that it's not a very well covered story, so the documentation is rather sparse and lacking a lot of information, but one later text relating to that group of nuns is speaking about a very autonomous existence of the sisters. So they've managed themselves quite well.
That's a nice story. Yes, that is inspiring. Someone having the confidence to stand on their rights and just say, this is what I do. And on that great and inspiring story, Adinel, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time. Thank you so much for coming up to the studio and talking about your Restory project and recovering cultural roots of small communities. It's been absolutely fascinating.
I'm very grateful to you, Karen, and it's been absolutely lovely talking to you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Today I've been talking with Adinel Dinkę about his research into Restory, recovering cultural roots of small communities. Totally inspiring. My thanks to everyone for listening. I hope you found it as interesting, enjoyable, yes, and inspiring as I did. Please do look out for the next MISOM podcast, in which MISOM members and associates talk about their recent or current research into the medieval world of Central Europe. And if you have research that you or your colleagues are doing and you would like to talk about it to MISOM, please do contact me through the MISOM board or the website administrator. In the meantime, I'm Karen Culver for the MISOM podcast. Thank you and goodbye until the next time.